All right, yo, happy Monday. We back up in this thing. So, you know what they say, man don't work, man don't eat. Let's make this a little smaller, shall we? So, what I decided we're going to be doing, figured I'd be, instead of me reading at work, since I got this book club and everything, I decided, let's go ahead and give it to the people. You did? Put the junk in studio mode. You're going to get it junk to the people. So, the book that we're going to be reading is Isis Unveiled by H.P. Blavatsky.
To do good and to
This book
purify
right
one's
here.
mind versus.
So it's a pretty big book, yo. Pretty big book. But that's good though. Why is it only done with a half like that? So we don't need to see.
178.
Hold on. Part 1, part 2. Yeah, hold on. What's going on here, buddy?
This audio program is.
Okay, that one is right. 29 minutes. Oh, that's volume 2 anyway.
183.
Okay. So, I'm not liking that. But we gonna figure it out. So let's just get started with volume 1. I just got a boy ready to roll up.
Presented by Audible.com.
So let's get this thing.
Audible. Audio that speaks to you wherever you are.
Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, The Infallibility of Modern Science by H.P. Blavatsky. Read by Graham Dunlop. This is a production by Adult Brain Audiobook Publishing. Chapter 1. Ego sum qui sum, an axiom of Hermetic philosophy. We commenced research where modern conjecture closes its faithless wings, and with us those were the common elements of science, which the sages of today disdain as wild chimeras, or despair of as unfathomable mysteries. Bulwer's Zanoni. There exists somewhere in this world an old book, so very old that our modern antiquarians might ponder over its pages an indefinite time, and still not quite agree as to the nature of the fabric upon which it is written. It is the only original copy now in existence. The most ancient Hebrew document on occult learning, the Sifra Zinuta, was compiled from it, and that at a time when the former was already considered in the light of a literary relic. One of its illustrations represents the divine essence emanating from Adam, like a luminous arc proceeding to form a circle, and then, having attained the highest point of its circumference, the ineffable glory bends back again and returns to earth, bringing a higher type of humanity in its vortex. As it approaches nearer and nearer to our planet, the emanation becomes more and more shadowy, until upon touching the ground it is as black as night. A conviction founded upon 70,000 years of experience, as they allege, has been entertained by Hermetic philosophers of all periods that matter has in time become, through sin, more gross and dense than it was at man's first formation. That, at the beginning, the human body was of a half ethereal nature, and that before the fall, mankind communed freely with the now unseen universes. But since that time, matter has become the formidable barrier between us and the world of spirits. The oldest esoteric traditions also teach that, before the mystic Adam, many races of human beings lived and died out, each giving place in its turn to another. Were these precedent types more perfect? Did any of them belong to the winged race of men mentioned by Plato and Phaedrus? It is the special province of science to solve the problem. The caves of France and the relics of the Stone Age afford a point at which to begin. As the cycle proceeded, man's eyes were more and more opened, until he came to know good and evil, as well as the Elohim themselves. Having reached its summit, the cycle began to go downward. When the arc attained a certain point which brought it parallel with the fixed line of our terrestrial plane, the man was furnished by nature with coats of skin, and the Lord God clothed them. This same belief in the pre-existence of a far more spiritual race than the one to which we now belong can be traced back to the earliest traditions of nearly every people. In the ancient Quiche manuscript, published by Brasseur de Bourbourg, the Popol Vuh, the first men are mentioned as a race that could reason and speak, whose sight was unlimited, and who knew all things at once. According to Philo Judaeus, the air is filled with an invisible host of spirits, some of whom are freed from evil and immortal, and others are pernicious and mortal. From the sons of El we are descended, and the sons of El must we become again. And the unequivocal statement of the anonymous Gnostic, who wrote the Gospel according to John, that as many as received him, i.e., who followed practically the esoteric doctrine of Jesus, would become the sons of God, points to the same belief. 1:12. Know ye not, ye are gods, exclaimed the Master. Plato describes admirably in Phaedrus the state in which man once was, and what he will become again, before and after the loss of his wings, when he lived among the gods, a god himself in the airy world. From the remotest periods, religious philosophies taught that the whole universe was filled with divine and spiritual beings of diverse races.
Y'all hear that? We been gods. Like, it ain't like this shit ain't nothing new. We been gods out there from the wazoo. Get it?
From one of these evolved in the course of time Adam, the primitive man.
Come on, man.
The Kalmucks and some tribes of Siberia also describe in their legends earlier creations than our present race. These beings, they say, were possessed of an almost boundless knowledge, and in their audacity even threatened rebellion against the great chief spirit. To punish their presumption and humble them, he imprisoned them in bodies, and so shut in their senses. From these they can escape but through long repentance, self-purification, and development. Their shamans, they think, occasionally enjoy the divine powers originally possessed by all human beings. The Astor Library of New York has recently been enriched by a facsimile of an Egyptian medical treatise, written in the 16th century BC, or more precisely 1552 BC, which accordingly to the commonly received chronology, it is the time when Moses was just 21 years of age. The original is written upon the inner bark of Cyperus papyrus and has been pronounced by Professor Schenk of Leipzig not only genuine but also the most perfect ever seen. It consists of a single sheet of yellow-brown papyrus of finest quality, 0.3 of a meter wide, more than 20 meters long, and formed one roll divided into 110 pages, all carefully numbered. It was purchased in Egypt in 1872 to 73 by the archaeologist Ebers, a well-to-do Arab from Luxor. The New York Tribune, commenting upon the circumstance, says, the papyrus bears internal evidence of being one of the 6 Hermetic books on medicine, named by Clement of Alexandria. The editor further says, at the time of Iamblichus, AD 363, the priests of Egypt showed 42 books which they attributed to Hermes, Thuti. Of these, according to that author, 36 contain the history of all human knowledge. The last 6 treated of anatomy, of pathology, of affections of the eye, instruments of surgery, and of medicines. The Papyrus Ebers is indisputably one of these ancient Hermetic works. If so clear a ray of light has been thrown upon ancient Egyptian science by the accidental encounter of the German archaeologist with one well-to-do Arab from Luxor, how can we know what sunshine may be let in upon the dark crypts of history by an equally accidental meeting between some other prosperous Egyptian and another enterprising student of antiquity? The discoveries of modern science do not disagree with the oldest traditions which claim an incredible antiquity for our race. Within the last few years, geology, which previously had only conceded that man could be traced as far back as the Tertiary period, has found unanswerable proofs that human existence antedates the last glaciation of Europe over 250,000 years. A hard nut, this, for patristic theology to crack, but an accepted fact with the ancient philosophers. Moreover, fossil implements have been exhumed together with human remains, which show that man hunted in those remote times and knew how to build a fire. But the forward step has not yet been taken in the search for the origin of the race. Science comes to a dead stop and waits for future proofs. Unfortunately, anthropology and psychology possess no Cuvier. Neither geologists nor archaeologists are able to construct, from the fragmentary bits hitherto discovered, the perfect skeleton of the triple man: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. Because the fossil implements of a man are found to become more rough and uncouth as geology penetrates deeper into the bowels of the earth. It seems a proof to science that the closer we come to the origin of man, the more savage and brute-like he must be. Strange logic. Does the findings of the remains in the cave of Devon prove that there was no contemporary races then who were highly civilized? When the present population of the earth have disappeared, and some archaeologist belonging to the coming race of the distant future shall excavate the domestic implements of one of our Indian or Andaman island tribes, will he be justified in concluding that mankind in the 19th century was just emerging from the Stone Age? It has lately been the fashion to speak of the untenable conceptions of an uncultivated past, as though it were possible to hide behind an epigram the intellectual quarries out of which the reputations of so many modern philosophers have been carved, just as Tyndall is ever ready to disparage ancient philosophers, for dressing up of whose ideas more than one distinguished scientist has derived honor and credit. So the geologists seem more and more inclined to take for granted that all the archaic races were contemporaneously in a state of dense barbarism. But not all our best authorities agree in this opinion. Some of the most eminent maintain exactly the reverse. Max Muller, for instance, says, "Many things are still unintelligible to us, and the hieroglyphic language of antiquity records but half of the mind's unconscious intentions. Yet more and more, the image of man, in whatever clime we meet him, rises before us, noble and pure from the very beginning. Even his errors we learn to understand. Even his dreams we begin to interpret. As far as we can trace back the footsteps of man, even on the lowest strata of history, we see the divine gift of a sound and sober intellect belonging to him from the very first, and the idea of humanity emerging slowly from the depths of an animal brutality can never be maintained again. As it is claimed to the unphilosophical to inquire into first causes, scientists now occupy themselves with considering their physical effects. The field of scientific investigation is therefore bounded by physical nature. When once its limits are reached, inquiry must stop, and their work be recommenced. With all due respect to our learned men, they are like the squirrel upon its revolving wheel, for they are doomed to turn their matter over and over again. Science is a mighty potency, and it is not for us pygmies to question her. But the scientists are not themselves science embodied any more than the men of our planet are the planet itself. We have neither the right to demand nor power to compel our modern day philosopher to accept without challenge a geographical description of the dark side of the moon. But if in some lunar cataclysm one of our inhabitants should be hurled thence into the attraction of our atmosphere, and land safe and sound at Dr. Carpenter's door, he would be indictable as recreant to professional duty if he should fail to set the physical problem at rest. For a man of science to refuse an opportunity to investigate any new phenomena, whether it comes to him in the shape of a man from the moon or a ghost from the Eddy homestead, is alike reprehensible.
Yeah.
Whether arrived at by the method of Aristotle or that of Plato, we need not to stop to inquire. But it is a fact that both the inner and outer natures of man are claimed to have been thoroughly understood by the ancient andrologists. Notwithstanding the superficial hypotheses of geologists, we are beginning to have almost daily proofs in corroboration of the assertions of these philosophers. They divided the interminable periods of human existence on this planet into cycles, during each of which mankind gradually reached the culminating point of highest civilization and gradually relapsed into abject barbarism. To what eminence the race in its progress had several times arrived may be feebly surmised by the wonderful monuments of old, still visible, and the descriptions given by Herodotus of other marvels of which no traces now remain. Even in his day, the gigantic structures of many pyramids and world-famous temples were but masses of ruins, scattered by the unrelenting hand of time. They are described by the father of history as these venerable witnesses of the long bygone glory of departed ancestors. He shrinks from speaking of divine things, and gives to posterity but an imperfect description from hearsay of some marvelous subterranean chambers of the labyrinth, where lay and now lie concealed the sacred remains of the king initiates. We can judge, moreover, of the lofty civilization reached in some periods of antiquity by the historical descriptions of the ages of the Ptolemies. Yet in that epoch the arts and sciences were considered to be degenerating, and the secret of a number of the former had been already lost. In the recent excavations of Mariat B, at the foot of the pyramids, statues of wood and other relics have been exhumed, which show that long before the period of the first dynasties, the Egyptians had attained to a refinement and perfection which is calculated to excite the wonder of even the most ardent admirers of Grecian art. Bayard Taylor describes those statues in one of his lectures, and tells us that the beauty of the heads, ornamented with eyes of precious stones and copper eyelids, is unsurpassed. Far below the stratum of sand in which lay the remains gathered into the collection of Lepsius, abbot, in the British Museum, were found buried the tangible proofs of the Hermetic doctrine of cycles, which has been already explained. Dr. Schliemann, the enthusiastic Hellenist, has recently found in his excavations on the Troad abundant evidences of the same gradual change from barbarism to civilization, and from civilization to barbarism again. Why then should we feel so reluctant to admit the possibility that if the antediluvians were so much better versed than ourselves in certain sciences as to have been perfectly acquainted with important arts, which we now term lost, they might have equally excelled in psychological knowledge? Such a hypothesis must be considered as reasonable as any other until some countervailing evidence shall be discovered to destroy it. Every true savant admits that in many respects human knowledge is yet in its infancy. Can it be that our cycle began in ages comparatively recent? These cycles, according to the Chaldean philosophy, do not embrace all mankind at one and the same time. Professor Draper partially corroborates this view by saying that the periods into which geology has found it convenient to divide the progress of man and civilization are not abrupt epochs which hold good simultaneously for the whole human race, giving as an instance the wandering Indians of America, who are only at the present moment emerging from the Stone Age. Thus, more than once scientific men have unwittingly confirmed the testimony of the ancients. Any Kabbalist, well acquainted with the Pythagorean system of numerals and geometry, can demonstrate that the metaphysical views of Plato were based upon the strictest mathematical principles. True mathematics, says the Magicon, is something with which all higher sciences are connected. Common mathematics is but a deceitful phantasmagoria, whose much praised infallibility only arises from this, that materials, conditions, and references are made its foundation. Scientists who believe they have adopted the Aristotelian method only because they creep when they do not run from demonstrated particulars to universals, glorify this method of inductive philosophy, and reject that of Plato, which they treat as unsubstantial. Professor Draper laments that such speculative mystics as Ammonius Saccas and Plotinus should have taken the place of the severe geometers of the old museum. He forgets that geometry, of all sciences the only one which proceeds from universals to particulars, was precisely the method employed by Plato in his philosophy. As long as exact science confines its observations to physical conditions and proceeds Aristotle-like, it certainly cannot fail. But notwithstanding that the world of matter is boundless for us, it still is finite, and thus materialism will turn forever in its vitiated circle, unable to soar higher than the circumference will permit. The cosmological theory of numerals, which Pythagoras learned from the Egyptian hierophants, is alone able to reconcile the two units, matter and spirit, and cause each to demonstrate the other mathematically. The sacred numbers of the universe in their esoteric combinations solve the great problem and explain the theory of radiation and the cycle of the emanations. The lower orders, before they develop into higher ones, must emanate from the higher spiritual ones, and when arrived at the turning point, be reabsorbed again into the infinite. Physiology, like everything else in the world of constant evolution, is subject to the cyclic revolution, and it now seems to be hardly emerging from the shadows of the lower arc. So it may be one day proved to have been at the highest point of the circumference of the circle far earlier than the days of Pythagoras. Mokas, the Sidonian, the physiologist and teacher of the science of anatomy, flourished long before the sage of Samos, and the latter received the sacred instructions from his disciples and descendants. Pythagoras, the pure philosopher, the deeply versed in the profounder phenomena of nature, the noble inherit.
That boy Pythagoras, a beast! Like, the thing what I love about these books back in the day, this book was published in 1877, right? Back then, it was still cool to be a mystic, to be a Gnostic, to be, a scholar or someone, a shaman, all of these titles and or spells that tend to accentuate power within the unseen. You know what I'm saying? It's like we got all these spookism words, occultists and fucking conspiracy theorists. All that shit is to scare motherfuckers from what's real, man. This, that real. Fuck you talking about, man.
Of the ancient lore, whose great aim was to free the soul from the letters of sense and force it to realize its powers, must live eternally in human memory. The impenetrable veil of arcane secrecy was thrown over the sciences taught in the sanctuary. This is the cause of the modern depreciating of the ancient philosophies.
And this is a CBD too. This not anything. This CBD is legal.
Even Plato and Philo Judaeus have been accused by many a commentator of absurd inconsistencies. Whereas the design which underlies the maze of metaphysical contradictions, so perplexing to the reader of the Timaeus, but is too
Just to show you how we do it, you know what I mean? We got it right here too, so we really still on. Essentially, we are on chapter 1, Before the Veil, right? Dogmatic assumption of modern science and theology. You feel me? We can mixy. Each one teach one, man. You over on this stream, you know what I mean? You getting this freedom for that free work. There is no religion hiding truth. Remember that.
But has Plato ever been read understandingly by one of the expounders of the classics? This is a question warranted by the criticisms to be found in such authors as Stallbaum, Schleiermacher, Ficinus, Latin translation, Heindorf, Sydenham, Buttman, Taylor, and Burgess, to say nothing of the lesser authorities. The covert allusions of the Greek philosophers to esoteric things have manifestly baffled these commentators to the last degree. They not only, with unblushing coolness, suggest as to ascertain difficult passages that another phraseology was evidently intended, but they audaciously make the changes. The Orphic line, of the song the order of the sixth race close, which can only be interpreted as a reference to the sixth race evolved in the consecutive evolution of the spheres, Burgess says, was evidently taken from a cosmogony where man was fain to be created the last. Ought not one who undertakes to edit another's work at least understand what his author means? Indeed, the ancient philosopher said that they audaciously make the changes. The Orphic line, of the song the order of the sixth race close, which can only be interpreted as a reference to the sixth race evolved in the consecutive evolution of the spheres, Burgess says, was evidently taken from a cosmogony where man was fain to be created the last. Ought not one who undertakes to edit another's work at least understand what his author means? Indeed, the ancient philosophers seem to be generally held, even by the least prejudiced of our modern critics, to have lacked that profundity and thorough knowledge in the exact sciences of which our century is so boastful. It is even questioned whether they understood that basic scientific principle, ex nihilo nihil fit. If they suspected the indestructibility of matter at all, say these commentators, it was not in consequence of a firmly established formula, but only through an intuitional reasoning and by analogy. We hold to the contrary opinion. The speculations of these philosophers upon matter were open to public criticism, but their teachings in regard to spiritual things were profoundly esoteric. Being thus sworn to secrecy and religious silence upon abstruse subjects involving the relations of spirit and matter, they rivaled each other in their ingenious methods for concealing their real opinions. The doctrine of metempsychosis has been abundantly ridiculed by men of science and rejected by theologians. Yet if it had been properly understood in its application to the indestructibility of matter and the immortality of spirit, it would have been perceived that it is a sublime conception. Should we not first regard the subject from the standpoint of the ancients before venturing to disparage its teachers? The solution of the great problem of eternity belongs neither to religious superstition nor to gross materialism. The harmony and the mathematical equiformity of the double evolution, spiritual and physical, are elucidated only in the universal numerals of Pythagoras, who built his system entirely upon the so-called metrical speech of the Hindu Vedas.
Hold up, did y'all just catch that? Did y'all just fucking catch that? This is what I be talking about. This is what I be talking about. The secrets of the universe. No matter how it's the Hindu Vedas talk about self, right? And that's why this is the infallibility of modern science. You dig?
Is but remedy from the standard by theologians. Yet if it had been properly understood in its application to the indestructibility of matter and the immortality of spirit, it would have been perceived that it is a sublime conception. Should we not first regard the subject from the standpoint of the ancients before venturing to disparage its teachers? The solution of the great problem of eternity belongs neither to religious superstition nor to gross materialism. The harmony and the mathematical equiformity of the double evolution, spiritual and physical, are elucidated only in the universal numerals of Pythagoras, who built his system.
Yo, we listening live. ISIS Unveiled. Tap in. Hold on. I'm doing some promo, bear with me. Hold on, we live, baby. We live listening to ISIS Unveiled now. Get this thing for free. We're gonna go on live reading these books, man, so that way each one is teaching one. Peace. Yeah. My bad, y'all. We back.
Entirely upon the so-called metrical speech of the Hindu Vedas. It is but lately that one of the most zealous Sanskrit scholars, Martin Haug, undertook the translation of the Atraya Brahmana of the Rig Veda. It has been till that time entirely unknown. These explanations indicate beyond dispute the identity of the Pythagorean and Brahmanical systems. In both, the esoteric significance is derived from the number. In the former, from the mystic relation of every number to everything intelligible to the human mind. In the latter, from the number of syllables of which each verse in the mantras consists. Plato, the ardent disciple of Pythagoras, realized it so fully as to maintain that the dodecahedron was the geometrical figure employed by the demiurgus in constructing the universe. Some of these figures had a peculiarly solemn significance. For instance, 4, of which the dodecahedron is the trine, was held sacred by Pythagoreans. It is the perfect square, and neither of the bounding lines exceed the other in length by a single point. It is the emblem of moral justice and divine equity, geometrically expressed. All the powers and great symphonies of physical and spiritual nature lie inscribed within the perfect square, and the ineffable name of Him, which name otherwise would remain unutterable, was replaced by the sacred number 4, the most binding and solemn oath with the ancient mystics, the Tetractys. If the Pythagorean metempsychosis should be thoroughly explained and compared with the modern theory of evolution, it would be found to supply every missing link in the chain of the ladder. But who of our scientists would consent to lose his precious time over the vagaries of the ancients? Notwithstanding proofs to the contrary, they not only deny that the nations of the archaic periods, but even the ancient philosophers had any positive knowledge of the heliocentric system. The venerable Bedes, the Augustines, and Lecanti appear to have smothered, with their dogmatic ignorance, all faith in the more ancient theologists of the pre-Christian centuries. But now philology and a closer acquaintance with Sanskrit literature have partially enabled us to vindicate them from these unmerited imputations. In the Vedas, for instance, we find positive proof that so long ago as 2000 BC, the Hindu sages and scholars must have been acquainted with the rotundity of our globe and the heliocentric system. Hence, Pythagoras and Plato knew well this astronomical truth. For Pythagoras obtained his knowledge in India, and from men who had been there, and Plato faithfully echoed his teachings. We will quote 2 passages from the Atareya Brahmana. In the serpent mantra, the Brahmana declares as follows, that this mantra is that one which was seen by the queen of the serpents, Sarparajni, because the earth, I am, is the queen of the serpents, and she is the mother and queen of all that moves, Sarpat. In the beginning, the earth, was but one head.
Hold on, did y'all just hear that? Mother Gaia is the earth of all living things? What are we talking about, man?
The queen of the serpents.
Hold on.
Sarpdil faithfully echoed his teachings. We will quote 2 passages from the Atareya Brahmana. In the serpent mantra, the Brahmana declares as follows, that this mantra is that one which was seen by the queen of the serpents, Sarparajni, because the earth, I am, is the queen of the serpents, and she is the mother and queen of all.
This right here, this the intuitional workboard right here. But no, that earth is the I am is kind of crazy.
All that moves, Sarpat. In the beginning, the earth, was but one head, round, without hair, bald, i.e. without vegetation. She then perceived this mantra, which confers upon him who knows it the power of assuming any form which he might desire. She pronounced the mantra, i.e. sacrificed to the gods, and in consequence immediately obtained a motley appearance. She became variegated, and able to produce any form she might like, changing one form into another. This mantra begins with the words, I am Ga Prishnir Akramit, X189. The description of the earth in the shape of a round and bald head, which was soft at first and became hard only from being breathed upon by the god Vayu, the lord of the air, forcibly suggests the idea that the authors of the sacred Vedic books knew the earth to be round or spherical. Moreover, that it had been a gelatinous mass at first, which gradually cooled off under the influence of the air and time. So much for their knowledge about our globe's sphericity. And now we will present the testimony upon which we base our assertion. That
They said the earth is a sphere. We just don't live on the outside of this motherfucker. Facts.
Hindus were perfectly acquainted with the heliocentric system at least 2,000 years BC. In the same treatise, Hotar, priest, is taught how the Shastras should be repeated. and how the phenomena of sunrise and sunset are to be explained. It says, the Agnishtoma is that God who burns. The sun never sets nor rises. When people think the sun is setting, it is not so. They are mistaken. For after having arrived at the end of the day, it produces two opposite effects, making night to what is below and day to what is on the other side. When they, the people, believe it rises in the morning, the sun only does thus. Having reached the end of the night, it makes itself produce two opposite effects, making day to what is below and night to what is on the other side. In fact, the sun never sets, nor does it set for him who has such a knowledge. This sentence is so conclusive that even the translator of the Rig Veda, Dr. Haug, was forced to remark it. He says this passage contains the denial of the existence of sunrise and sunset, and that the author supposes the sun to remain always in its high position. In one of the earliest Niveds, Rishi Kutsa, a Hindu sage of the remotest antiquity, explains the allegory of the first laws given to the celestial bodies. For doing what she ought not to do, Anihat, and Netis, or Nana, the Persian Venus, representing the earth in the legend, is sentenced to turn around the sun. The satras, or sacrificial sessions, prove undoubtedly that so early as in the 18th or 20th century BC, the Hindus had made considerable progress in astronomical science. The satras lasted 1 year and were nothing but an imitation of the sun's yearly course. They were divided, says Haug, into two distinct parts, each consisting of 6 months of 30 days each. In the midst of both was the Vishuvan, equator or central day, cutting the whole satras into two halves, etc. The scholar, although he ascribes the composition of the bulk of the Brahmanas to the period 1400 to 1200 BC, is of the opinion that the oldest of the hymns may be placed at the very commencement of Vedic literature, between the years 2400 to 2000 BC. He finds no reason for considering the Vedas less ancient than the sacred books of the Chinese. As the Shu King, or Book of History, and the sacrificial songs of the Shi King, or Book of Odes, have been proved to have been in antiquity as early as 2200 BC. Our philologists may be yet compelled, before long, to acknowledge that in astronomical knowledge, the antediluvian Hindus were their masters. At all events, there are facts which prove that certain astronomical calculations were as correct with the Chaldeans in the days of Julius Caesar as they are now. The calendar was reformed by the conqueror. The civil year was found to correspond so little with the seasons that summer had merged into the autumn months, and the autumn months into full winter. It was Sosigenes, the Chaldean astronomer, who restored order into the confusion by putting back the 25th of March 90 days, thus making it correspond with the vernal equinox. And it was Sosigenes, again, who fixed the lengths of the month as they are now remain. In America, it was found by the Montezuman army. The calendar of the Aztecs gave an equal number of days and weeks to each month. The extreme accuracy of their astronomical calculations was so great that no error had ever been discovered in their reckoning by subsequent verifications, while the Europeans who landed in Mexico in 1519 were, by the Julian calendar, nearly 11 days in advance of the exact time. It is to the priceless and accurate translations of the Vedic books, and to the personal researches of Dr. Haug, that we are indebted for the corroboration of the claims of the Hermetic philosophers. That the period of Zarathustra, Spitama, Zoroaster, was of untold antiquity can be easily proved. The Brahmanas, to which Haug ascribes 4,000 years, describe the religious contests between the ancient Hindus, who lived in the pre-Vedic period, and the Iranians. The battles between the Devas and the Asuras, the former representing the Hindus and the latter the Iranians, are described at length in the sacred books. As the Iranian prophet was first to raise himself against what he called the idolatry of the Brahmins, and to designate them as the Devas, devils, how far back must then have been this religious crisis? This contest, answers Dr. Haug, must have appeared to the authors of the Brahmanas as old as the feats of King Arthur appeared to English writers of the 19th century. There was not a philosopher of any notoriety who did not hold to this doctrine of metempsychosis. as taught by the Brahmins, Buddhists, and later by the Pythagoreans, in its esoteric sense, whether he expressed it more or less intelligibly. Origen and Clemens Alexandrinus, Synesius and Chalcidius all believed in it, and the Gnostics, who are unhesitatingly proclaimed by history as a body of the most refined, learned, and enlightened men, were all believers in metempsychosis. Socrates entertained opinions identical with those of Pythagoras, and both, as the penalty of the divine philosophy, were put to a violent death. The rabble has been the same in all ages. Materialism has been and will ever be blind to spiritual truths.
Materialism will forever be blind to spiritual truths. Hold on, we gotta just go back a little bit because these niggas died horrible deaths because they were divinely enlightened. That's how
These philosophers, by fact, believed in it, and the Gnostics, by the Pythagoreans, and its esoteric appeared to English writers of the 19th century. There was not a philosopher of any notoriety who did not hold to this doctrine of metempsychosis, as taught by the Brahmins, Buddhists, and later by the Pythagoreans, in its esoteric sense, whether he expressed it more or less intelligibly. Origen and Clemens Alexandrinus, Synesius and Chalcidius all believed in it, and the Gnostics, who are unhesitatingly proclaimed by history as a body of the most refined, learned, and enlightened men, were all believers in metempsychosis. Socrates entertained opinions identical with those of Pythagoras, and both, as the penalty of the divine philosophy, were put to a violent death. The rabble has been the same in all ages. Materialism has been and will ever be blind to spiritual truths. These philosophers held with the Hindus that God had infused into matter a portion of his own divine spirit, which animates and moves every particle. They taught that men have two souls, separate and quite different natures. The one perishable, the astral soul, or the inner fluidic body, the other incorruptible and immortal, the ogoides, or portion of the divine spirit, that the mortal or astral soul perishes at each gradual change at the threshold of every new sphere, becoming with every transmigration more purified. The astral man, intangible and invisible as he might be to our mortal earthly senses, is still constituted of matter, though sublimated. Aristotle, notwithstanding that for political reasons of his own he maintained a prudent silence as to certain esoteric matters, expressed very clearly his opinion on the subject. It was his belief that human souls are emanations of God, that are finally reabsorbed into divinity. Zeno, the founder of the Stoics, taught that there are two eternal qualities throughout nature.
I think we're gonna wrap it up on that joke. On that note, y'all, that was kind of heavy, actually. Damn. Yeah, that was heavy. Appreciate everybody for coming out. Catch y'all boys and gals tomorrow. Peace and power to the people.